Well, happy Tuesday and welcome to today's Capital One Teachable Tuesday webinar, co-sponsored by CoSIDA and the N4A. We are pleased to offer the second of our two-part discussion on LGBTQ+ inclusion initiatives in college athletics. Last Tuesday, we offered the administrator's point of view on this topic, and today we have the student-athlete point of view. My name is Tanya Vogel. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'll serve as the webinar moderator today. I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have because of our incredible panelists, Casey Cross, Emma Gee, and Jayden Vasquez. I'll share a little bit more about them in a few minutes. One of our scheduled panelists, former Franklin Pierce University, CC Telfer, can't join us today, but will be available for comment and participate in any questions that we have following this webinar. Before we begin, we'd like to say a quick thank you to our corporate partner, Capital One, presenting sponsor of CoSIDA's Continuing Education Series. As a reminder, the on-demand webinar will be posted later today on CoSIDA.com and CoSIDA's YouTube channel. We also will have this as a podcast, and you'll be able to download it from the services listed on CoSIDA.com. Please invite your colleagues to listen and watch the on-demand webinar, as it's free to everyone. Also, part one of our webinar series is available on demand, and it was an incredible conversation. So I encourage you to check it out. For today's webinar, we're going to have a few opening remarks from our panelists, and after that, we're going to dive into questions. I want to thank those of you that submitted questions in advance. We will also work to get those answered along the way. And I encourage those of you that are on the webinar today to submit questions into the chat. Again, I'll work to get those answered, but if we're not able to answer them on today's webinar, we'll make sure to get them answered offline and provide those responses to everyone. On to the introductions. Today we have with us Casey Cross, pronouns they, them, their. Casey is a mental health and performance clinician at the University of Arkansas. Former basketball player at Columbia College in Missouri, Casey earned a master's degree in clinical psychology at Arkansas while also serving as a graduate assistant. Casey has also worked as an associate counselor with LGBTQ+ focus at the University of Wisconsin. Our next panelist is Emma Gee, pronouns she, her, and hers. Emma is a track and field graduate student athlete at Temple University after completing her undergraduate career at BYU. Emma was the only out athlete at BYU during her time there. She's an NCAA regional qualifier in the 3,000 meter steeplechase, and she was part of the BYU cross country championship team that placed 7th at the NCAAs. Our final panelist is Jayden Vasquez, pronouns he, him, his. Jayden is a football student athlete at Fordham University. He's a junior linebacker and has appeared in 20 career games over his first 2 seasons, making 3 starts as a sophomore. Jayden leads the LGBTQ+ subgroup at Fordham called Fordham Connect, a student organization which aims to erase the stigma around vulnerability and mental health in sport. It's a fantastic panel, and it's time to hear from them. So I asked the entire panelist group, what brought you to the table today? Emma, can you get us started?
Yeah, thanks for having me. So as I was introduced, I was the first out LGBTQ+ student athlete at Brigham Young University. And why I'm here on the panel today is because I owe a huge part of my coming out process to the administrators that made it possible. I was able to interact with allies at BYU, and that wasn't something that I was aware was going to be a part of the culture at the time. But I'm so excited and grateful to be able to share how they helped me feel comfortable being myself in athletics. So thank you so much for having me.
I love it, Anna. Jayden?
Yeah, one thing that brought me here today is that I came out around this time last year, and the amount of support I've gotten from Fordham, friends and family have been great. And a lot of the issues I faced myself, I realized were internally, and a lot of things have been changing. And with Fordham Connect and other things that everyone's doing in the community, I want to make it known that other people can feel accepted, and it just has to be normalized.
Thanks so much, Jayden. Casey.
Yeah, so I actually graduated undergrad about 10 years ago and then moved into the administrative side now. And I've never been in a position where I've had someone else that I can look up to say, okay, this is how I navigate being queer in college athletics. And now that I'm in a position to hopefully be a mentor to others or even just help administration, I feel like it's my responsibility to this next generation of college students that are in school now and the ones that are coming to be able to kind of make a path for them to know how to best navigate this environment.
I love it. And thank you guys so much again for being here today to share your stories and really help our audience as they continue to try to find ways to serve their student athletes and make things better. So that leads me to question number one. What are some of the biggest issues that LGBTQ plus student athletes are facing currently at their institutions, within their athletics departments, and or on their teams? Emma, why don't you get us started?
Yeah, okay. So being at BYU, which is an institution that's backed by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, one of the biggest issues that student athletes were facing was the administration were working backed by an administration that had homophobic policies. So when it came to addressing LGBTQ inclusion, there was not only a lack of education on the administrator's side, but also kind of limitations on how and the ways in which they could show their support. And that's very isolating for the student athletes that identify as LGBTQ plus, because you are never sure which adults can support you, if they're going to be allies or if they're going to report you to the honor code, which at BYU was their way of enforcing some of those homophobic policies. So for me, in my experience, it was a lack of trust with administrators, a lack of, knowing their education around these issues, and that definitely affected my mental health. And I know that it just makes it hard to go to administrators when you need help around these topics.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Emma. We're going to talk a little bit more about faith-based institutions in a second. Jayden, can you weigh in on some of the largest challenges that students are facing?
Yeah, Fordham is a Jesuit university, but a lot of our administration has been very helpful throughout the process of creating the student-led initiative. But one thing that a lot of our athletes face right now is LGBTQ topics still being a taboo subject. And I say this because a lot of people are out here at Fordham, but some of them, and I still do too, feel so uncomfortable to talk about this, because when we go out, we get people turn their heads and they're like, this isn't something that should be an everyday conversation. And I believe it should change. So one thing that I find people struggle with is not only expressing themselves personally, but expressing themselves in the community.
Perfect. Casey, you've had a chance, obviously, to work in administration for some time. What are you seeing as some of the largest challenges that these students are facing?
Yeah, I think in my position, what I've seen as kind of the most difficult is just the cis heteronormative language that's used whenever coaches or administration is addressing teams, often saying men and women and boys and girls. And I think that often makes some students that may identify as trans or non-binary or gender non-conforming feel pretty excluded, and also not feeling like they can say, hey, you didn't include me whenever you began this greeting, just because, we are adults and that dynamic feels a little weird. And then another thing is just the assumption that everyone is straight. I hear that quite often, whenever administration, they are trying to connect to students, but they may ask, hey, do you have a girlfriend or do you have a boyfriend, instead of using more of a gender neutral term, just as in partner, or just asking, who they're dating rather than assuming. And another thing that I've started working with SAC on is trying to create more gender neutral bathrooms, even if they are just single stall. And for the most part, what we found is just like a quick change in the messaging or the signage around the bathrooms, not necessarily a big renovation needs to happen, but just having more gender neutral bathrooms so that people do feel more comfortable going into restrooms and not feeling like, oh, someone's going to say something or they're going to think I'm this or that whenever I walk in.
Perfect. I'm gonna just pause for a second and acknowledge just one thing, which is we want to create environments where people can be the best versions of themselves, right? And so the things that Emma and Jayden and Casey identified are things that are keeping our student athletes from becoming the best versions of themselves, from being comfortable in their academic environment, their training environment, their social environment. And as administrators, like, this is what we signed up to do, is to try to help them navigate their way through college. And so the points that Emma and Jayden and Casey all brought up are things that are their roadblocks. I heard things like homophobic policies. And so we have to take a look at, whether we're faith-based or not, we got to take a look at what are our policies doing to create these roadblocks for our student athletes. The lack of education, the taboo subject, what are we doing to make things more accessible in terms of conversations? And so that brings me to my next question. So we understand a little bit better about what some of these issues are. How can departments or teams and coaches, leaders of those teams, how can we move the needle to create a more inclusive environment for our students? Casey, I'm gonna ask you to answer that one first.
Yeah, I think what Jayden mentioned a while ago is just like normalizing LGBTQ people. I think that is something that is still missing out of athletics. We talk a lot about women in sports, and more recently we're starting to talk about race in sports, but we're still missing a pretty decent sized chunk of people in sports that it's like we know that LGBTQ people are there, and maybe we are accepting of them, but we don't do anything to really acknowledge and highlight them. I think even just as simple as in June, let's put a post up there about Pride Month. In October, let's put something out there about Coming Out Day. Whenever we are, listing bios on our websites for staff, I often see, this person is married to this woman or this woman is married to this man. Like, let's also give our LGBTQ staff the ability to list their partners, because that's only going to help our LGBTQ student athletes know, okay, this is someone that I can identify with and someone I can relate to. And I always tell staff, like, yes, I'm a mental health clinician, and I love it when student athletes seek me out to want to talk, but I'm not going to vibe with everyone. There are going to be other people in the LGBTQ community that they may want to reach out to, but they have no idea who these people are. So if we can even just be a little bit more visual and open and talking about LGBTQ people and topics and issues, I think student athletes would feel so much more comfortable being themselves, being authentic, and reaching out to different mentors within our athletic departments.
Yeah, to jump off that, one thing I've thought about is that we've always see administration bringing in Black men or women that work in business to show that our Black athletes can make it up in a business spectrum, and they bring in business women to empower women and to show that they can strive for something better. But one thing we do not see is people that identify in the LGBT community in those roles. And if we put something out there where we can show that, hey, this is someone that is out and proud and they are living their life and able to achieve a certain level of success, I feel like that would be a great aspect to show to our LGBTQ athletes, even if they are in the closet.
Awesome idea. Emma, some of the things that you've seen institutions doing or ideas that you have on how they can move the needle.
So I agree that representation and visibility is a huge part of empowering student athletes. And I think in my experience at BYU, a huge part of it was administrators taking their own initiative to educate themselves about the LGBTQ plus community. That wasn't something that the institution was going to ask them to do. So I feel that that kind of initiative would have helped spark more and more conversations, and that the student athletes themselves wouldn't have had to go so far out of the way to ask for it. So I think education is the biggest thing anytime you're addressing any kind of bias you may have toward a group of people. So I agree. Visibility, representation, and education, so important.
You summed it up perfectly. Jayden and Emma, I want to dig a little deeper, talking about institutions that are rooted in religious values and possibly have homophobic policies or the topic is taboo. What have you seen, in addition to administrators educating themselves, what have you seen as behaviors or acts that have made it easier for you in your walk?
One thing that has been made it easier for me is that administration has come to me personally, saying, I love what you're doing. If you need any help, don't hesitate to reach out. And I don't know if, as Emma said, she has struggles with administration not knowing how to push it because she was at a religious institution. But if there are any at Fordham, I'm not aware of them. But what makes it very easy for myself and other athletes to come out is knowing that administration is going to have our back, and knowing that if we do decide to have any group sessions or want to do anything on campus, that they are going to help us out and show support.
I agree. I feel that, and maybe this is harsh to say, but I wish I'd seen more bravery and initiative on the part of administrators. I understand that this is someone's job and this is their career and this is how they support themselves, but just with how intense things were at BYU and just the ramifications of mental health and suicide on campus, I always wondered why I didn't see more action taken on the part of administrators. So maybe that's something I just need to process for me, but please, like, initiative taking, just having the conversation, even when you don't fully understand yet, makes such a big difference. Because I think especially at a religious institution like BYU, where the majority of students are kind of coming from a similar place with religion, like, we're all on this journey together. And I think more often than not, you're going to connect with the athletes that you're speaking to about these things, and you're learning at, at the same rate. So I just wish there was more bravery with that and putting yourself out there, because that's the kind of thing that changes culture and can ultimately challenge some of the policies that keep things feeling so unsafe.
And I appreciate you really bringing it up and calling us all out. And what I love is when you use the word bravery, which I will attach to courage. And I think Brene Brown does the best job of tying vulnerability with courage. So it leaves us to a nice segue into Jayden's work. Jayden, I mentioned in your bio that you were able to start a student organization with some friends and teammates. Could you talk a little bit about the organization and then share some of the keys to actually getting that launched on your campus?
Yeah, so Fordham Connect, it kind of started this summer during quarantine, because I had a lot of friends and other athletes in different sports talking about how they felt so disconnected from themselves. Football or any other sport that we play has been part of our life since we were about 6 years old. And this was the first year that our season had been canceled, and we haven't, and we're going down a road of uncertainty. And so a lot of people were getting depressed or feeling an out-of-body experience because that they're no longer themselves or who they thought they were. And so we decided, hey, what can we put through to have athletes come have a place to talk about things that they face, and just overall aspect of mental health. And then we started thinking we can have these discussion groups for certain subgroups as well, for BIPOC, the Black, Indigenous people of color, also a women's subgroup and an LGBTQ subgroup, and that's why I became the executive leader of our LGBTQ subgroup, because there is nothing on campus for us. I might know some people that identify with the community, but there's nothing in place for us to come together and talk and just understand that other people are facing the same challenges as us. So over the summer, we connected with administration, Janan Paul and Ed Cole, which is our athletic director, and they were ecstatic. They were so happy that we wanted to do this, and they were also excited because this is something that we can do even if we're not in person because of Zoom. And going forward, it's a great thing to have a group like this, because when you take something off of you that you've been holding on your shoulders for so long, it just makes you feel like you're open with yourself and more connected, so that you can then focus on play.
I love that. And you probably saw, I think everybody's head was nodding. When you take that weight off, right, you free yourself up to be the best version of yourself and focus on the things that are important. Casey, I wonder if you could share, if you think about students like Jayden and Emma, how can administrators help and be supportive and maybe help them get a group organized to create a space for students to talk about these, the challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, so the thing that I always recommend to administration, and I've worked on both sides. I've worked in the athletic department and on campus, and I apologize if y'all can hear sirens going. But just, and there's my dog. I knew this was gonna happen. I jinxed it. I always encourage you to ask your students.
It is so perfect, Casey. You just keep going. I know. Hey, it's okay.
I told y'all this. I was like, I have a feeling a siren is gonna come through at some point and set her off. And she was sleeping, and of course it went off. But what I always encourage administration to do is, if you know that you have LGBTQ students, ask them what they want. I think a huge problem comes into play when we have all these ideas. We're super accepting and we want to see our students achieve things. We want to see them successful. We want to see them be able to focus on play, like Jayden said. So we just start implementing all these things without actually asking them what it is that they want. And something that I've realized, I'm 10 years removed from college, so I'm a little bit closer in age than a lot of our administration, but things have changed so much in the 10 years that I've been out of school. And something I've realized is we are starting to have more student athletes who are out as trans or out as non-binary or whatever. And that's not something that was very common or popular back when I was in school. And so as we try to keep up with the generation and the vocabulary and the things that they're learning about themselves, it's best to just say, hey, what is it that you all need from us? And I'll say this, our athletic director, Hunter Yurchek, that is something that I feel like he has done a great job, especially with our Black student athletes on campus. Instead of saying, hey, I'm going to put these things in place and this will help y'all and things will be great, he said, hey, tell me what it is that you want. Tell me what it is that administration can do for you. What is it that we can do to make y'all feel more successful, and go from there and actually take into consideration those things and implement those things. Obviously, we can't implement everything because budgets and whatnot, but listen to them and what it is that they need and want. And I don't really think that you can go wrong from there.
Such a great point. And Casey, if you think you're removed, you can imagine somebody like me. But to that point about asking what they want, what they need is so critical. You know, our audience has many sports information and communications professionals who want to do right by their students, coaches, and staff. You know, we understand pronouns, and I think it would be helpful if panelists could share what advice you have for these communications professionals to better understand and appropriately utilize pronouns in their work.
I'll jump in really quickly if that's okay. Ask pronouns. That's something I always push, is just ask. And if you don't feel comfortable asking, then offer your pronouns first, and that'll open up the door for someone else to offer their pronouns. I know, like with myself, I use non-traditional pronouns. I use they, them, and their, and I'm getting more comfortable offering mine first to people that I know identify as cisgender and they use binary pronouns. But it's super helpful when someone that does use, you know, kind of your traditional pronouns come up to me and say, hey, my pronouns are he, him, and his. What are yours? Like, to me, it's just like, okay, that weight is lifted. I don't have to be the one to kind of like out myself or you know, other myself in this situation. And this person is understanding of pronouns and they want me to feel included. And then the other thing I'll say is, you know, if you're working on any articles or stories that are go on the website, before you publish that story, maybe get with the student athlete or the staff member, whoever it's going to be, and ask them what are their pronouns, because it is nothing worse getting on the internet, seeing this great story about yourself, and then only to see that they've used the wrong pronouns and you don't feel like you're in a position to correct it. And, you know, everyone's patting you on the back for all these things, but it's like, I can't even revel in this success because I'm busy thinking about, oh, all these people are going to refer to me as this pronoun that I don't even associate with.
One thing I can add, I know you can see someone that looks like you or looks like someone else and assume that they might have a he, him pronoun, but pronouns are chosen and gender is a spectrum and they don't always connect. I think someone's pronouns are just as important as their name. So when you know their pronouns and decide not to call them by that, that's just saying that you don't care about their identity because that's something that they hold dear to themselves. And I know a lot of people aren't accustomed to or not used to using they, them, and theirs, but that's just something that people have to get over for themselves because times are changing, and that's how people identify, and just have to show respect to those people. And the first step in creating a safe space to allow people to be as they are is accepting their pronouns.
Yeah, I want to support what they both said because it honestly should have always been like this. People should always be able to be spoken to the way that they identify. And I know that that's something that my generation in particular is really emphasizing, and I think that's wonderful. And yeah, making assumptions is just never okay, and it is not effective communication. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here when I think we're all working for the most effective communication, and using people's right pronouns is the way to go. So, love it.
Perfectly said. You know, we had a question from the audience come in about being an ally, and I think about the space of allyship, you know, in regards to LGBTQ plus students, but also in the space of pronouns. So you guys have touched on this, but we'll take it one step further. The question is, what's the best way for administrators to let their student athletes know that we
I can't hear you.
You can hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Hey, yeah, I think we may have lost. Yeah.
No, Tanya.
Wait, I'm gonna, hopefully she doesn't mind. I'm gonna assume that the question was how to let student athletes know that they're stepping. I can't actually see the question. Oh, here it is. What's the best way for administrators to let their student athletes know that we are allies and can support them during their careers? So
I think that kind of comes back to what you said, and just reaching out. I think the best thing to show support and show that you care and want to help people be the best they themselves is reaching out and asking if it's for anything, Black students, LGBTQ students, just asking, hey, what would you like to be implemented? How can I help you through this process and your time at college? Because that is their job.
I agree. It's 2020. It's just best practice for being a professional. And if you're going to work with a diverse student athlete body, then you need to prepare to do so. So I think it's just taking that initiative and having those conversations because that's the job. And yeah, I think that kind of summarizes it. So it is on you to kind of ask what people's pronouns are, what makes them feel most comfortable. Because if you're genuinely looking for their best performance, then that's definitely the way to go. That's kind of how you handle it with any athlete in any situation. So queer student athletes are no different.
And I completely agree. And, you know, someone had mentioned something about allies. One thing that I'm really big on is for allies, especially with pronouns, if you hear someone being dead named or someone uses the wrong pronouns, you know, correct that person. You know, don't leave it up to that individual to feel uncomfortable in that situation by not saying anything, or they feel like they're the ones that have to correct them. Be an ally and kind of take the brunt of that for them. If someone uses the wrong pronouns for Jayden, I'm going to step in and say, no, he actually uses he, him, and his pronouns. And I think that's a great way to let student athletes know that you support them, and that's a way to be an active ally. That's something that I'm really big on. You know, we all can say we're allies and not do anything, but if you are actually an ally, you have to be active and you have to do certain acts in order to support, you know, those of us that do identify as queer or whatever, any other marginalized identity that someone may hold.
Can I add on to that? Oh, sorry.
You go ahead.
I watched a lot of administrators lip service being an ally. And I just want to say being an ally is something that you are all the time, as Casey said. It is not something that you embody when it is convenient for you. And I saw that happen a lot, that behind closed doors and in closed meetings, that people weren't actually being allies. But, you know, when there was press around and when it was a social media campaign, they were so happy to be seen as an ally. So I just want to say that's completely inappropriate, and I don't think that's what people on this call are going to bring to the table, but just know that that isn't ever okay.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to touch on that Casey brought up is that when allies step in and they're the ones that correct people for misuse of pronouns or discrimination, that's what means the most. Having someone that doesn't identify with the community come in and show support, I feel like that helps other people outside the community accept people that identify as LGBTQ.
Okay, can you see me again? Oh, thank God. Of course, we never have a web problem until we have a web problem, right? I love, first of all, I love jumping back in and hearing such great conversations. So thank you for keeping it going. We had another question from the audience. It says that if an SID knows of an LGBTQ plus student athlete who is out and they are interested in pitching the story to the media, what is the best way to approach the student athlete and ensure that they will help educate the journalists, give their story, etc.?
Wait, is that me? For me?
Go for it, Emma.
So, okay, can you ask me the question one more time? I totally missed that.
That's all right. So if an SID knows of an LGBTQ plus student athlete who's out and they're interested in pitching a story to the media, what's the best way to approach the student athlete and also ensure that they're going to help to educate the journalist and give their story justice?
I think extending the opportunity to give someone a voice is, I experience that as very flattering, maybe because I'm a PR major and that's like my thing, I love it. But I think, yeah, like sending an email and just saying, hey, you can, like, if you do this, I'm happy to support you no matter what. If you don't feel comfortable, that's totally okay. I think sending that and feeling it out is totally appropriate, but definitely extending the support. Like if you need help with me going over it and rereading it for you and just making sure that we're really communicating how you feel and what your priorities and sharing your story are, I feel like that's always helpful.
One thing with me, I was reached out by Joe DeBari here at Fordham, and it was great the way that he did it. He contacted me saying, hey, there's someone that would like to speak to you. If you are comfortable, I can give them your contact information. And just asking for like, if I'm comfortable to do that, to express myself in something I might not be, was very helpful.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that. I think what they said was perfect, and maybe even just, you know, offering or extending the invitation to talk to the journalist yourself and say, hey, before the story is ran, we would like to read it, and just to make sure that, you know, pronouns are correctly. You are presenting this student athlete in the correct light, or however that they said certain things. Just because, not that I don't trust journalists, but they can kind of take off on their own views sometimes. And so just making sure that it is presented in a way that's not going to offend the student athlete.
You guys perfectly said. We got another audience question. It says, as each institution looks to be proactive rather than reactive and looks to dive into current athletics handbooks, policies, etc., how can we further protect those in the LGBTQ plus family through policies?
Number one, the NCAA needs to only include schools in the NCAA that are going to abide by set diversity and inclusion standard. And if schools aren't willing to abide by those standards, then they shouldn't be competing in the NCAA.
And I would add, you know, if you've got certain school policies, make sure that you have diverse voices on that group that's making those policies. It's nothing worse than working for a place or being a student athlete in a place that you've got to abide by all these policies, but your voice wasn't represented at all. So if you're going to have certain policies on campus, make sure you have you know, Black voices, make sure you have other BIPOC voices, you have voices of women, you have voices of queer people, you have voices of gender nonconforming people, because you don't know what you don't know. And all of us, even if we don't mean any harm, we're coming into situations and we're creating policies based on our own worldviews, and we're completely missing someone else's and then not realizing until later that we've harmed them in some way.
Perfectly said. I do have a question kind of about the current climate. So you guys have talked a lot about how administrators and coaches can make an environment more inclusive. I would love to hear from you guys about things that really give you optimism, things that you're seeing move in the right direction, whether they're positive initiatives or different programs or high profile athletes that are out or are raising the issue to the public domain. Can you share what brings hope and optimism to your world?
One thing that my coach does that I was very grateful, even before I came out, is he says things like, I don't care what your sexual orientation is or what your races. He accepts them all and appreciates them all for what they are. But when on the field, he looks at all of us as athletes that are a family coming together. And I just think that's great, because even though like he acknowledges all of it, he's still going to treat us exactly the same. And by stating that before, like when all the freshmen come on, by stating that, that really shows support for so many different diversities, and it helps open up the players that might be closed off to that, by showing that he supports it and that they should too in the long run.
Gonna go.
I'll let you go, Emma.
Thanks. So when I came out for the first time, it was to athletic director Liz Starger at BYU. And it was the first time I ever said that I was LGBTQ plus officially out loud. And I was raised my whole life in the church. That was the only context I had, were heterosexual relationships, a temple marriage. I was very religious. And Liz obviously is very religious as well. But when I came out to her, she said that she loved me, and she pulled out her phone and showed me a picture of one of her good friends who was lesbian and who was married and who had a son. And I'd never been shown that kind of representation before from someone who had my background. And it meant the world to me, and it changed my ability to navigate BYU with hope and to kind of start pushing back against some of the policies that are there. So it makes a big difference, you know, those small interactions, and when you can show up, you know, with just enough support for someone to keep them going. So please never underestimate the impact you can have by being there for someone and just seeing and supporting them as they are.
Emma, thank you for sharing that. And Liz, if you're out there, you deserve a shout out. But Emma, I just appreciate you saying it just like that. And Jayden, same thing, you know, to have a football coach, you know, in a sport that is struggling in its own right, to have a football coach put it out there first is awesome. Casey, what gives you hope and optimism?
Honestly, the fact that we're having this panel right now, like the number of panels that I have sat on in like the last 3 years, and especially the last year, focusing on being out and queer in sports, it's kind of blown my mind. Like there's no way that 20-year-old Casey would ever have believed that this would be a thing. And the fact that we've got so many attendees on this call, and that tells me that there's so many people out there and so many schools out there that are really trying to get it right. And I really hope that y'all are hearing and feeling the emotion that Jayden and Emma are bringing to this, because they're telling you right there, like to hear a coach say, I accept you, and to have an athletic director say, I love you. That is so incredibly powerful for people, and that gets us through so much. And I'm sure this is the mental health clinician in me, but it truly can save a life. I've seen it a number of times. Just someone saying, I love you, I accept you, I'm here for you, I support you. That means the world to so many people, and we are in a very unique position to touch the lives of so many young people right now. And we would not be doing our jobs if we didn't touch the lives of every single one, not regardless of their sexual orientation, not regardless of their gender. Like if we just did the right thing by them, we could change so many lives, and they're going to change so many lives because of that. So I appreciate both of you saying those things and just being so vulnerable, because I remember being in that position and knowing how great it would have felt to hear someone say that back then.
Yeah, to jump off that, I I would have never thought I would be doing this a couple years ago. I always have told myself that I would be in the closet my entire life just because I didn't want to face the discrimination. And then coming to college and seeing administration talk, just having a conversation talking about LGBTQ people and saying how here we accept them, and being in a community that accepts everyone for who they are definitely changes people's lives. Because if I never had that, I don't know if I would be on this call right now, or even be out in my life. And so for administration, just the idea of you saying something and addressing it and making it a topic of conversation will definitely change someone's life.
Really, truly, perfectly said. There is a downside to this, in that there is still a lot of work to be done. So kind of the flip side of the question, what are some things that give you pause or cause concern for the current climate for our student athletes in this country?
One thing that I see a big problem is that people are now accepting people's sexual orientation, but they're not accepting gender identity. That is really big in sports and even outside of sports, how they, and it goes along with pronouns as well. People are accepting of lesbians, more now gay people, and bisexuality. And I see this firsthand. A lot of people, they don't really accept you as bisexual. They just kind of like to see what they want to see you as. And then for pronouns and people identify as transgender, they don't accept that, and they kind of see that part of the community as something that isn't, that shouldn't be. And that's one thing that we definitely need to push forward with.
Basically, people need to challenge how they're conditioned to think. That was something that I had to do being raised a member of the church. I was taught that, being LGBTQ plus wasn't natural, and that anyone that identified outside of their sex assigned at birth was just basically crazy. And both of those beliefs are wrong and they're inappropriate. And it took me time and education to challenge those things and to become better. And as I'm sure we've all learned in the past year, especially with race conversations, we have so much work to do in challenging the way that we're conditioned to think. We all need to do a better job. And it's disappointing to see adults and professionals, especially at BYU, not taking a stand for what matters and focusing more on the money and job security when there are literally lives at stake. So to me, that's always been really difficult to come to terms with, especially when I myself had to work so hard to challenge things and, become better than how I was raised. But it's a process, and I just hope that everyone can, commit to that. We're all on this journey together, and we can do so much better.
I have nothing to add. I think they both said it perfectly. I have absolutely nothing to add there.
Yeah, they are incredible. We did get a question from the audience that I think you guys can definitely weigh in on. What are your best suggestions to reach out to student athletes that are interested in creating a student athlete LGBTQ plus program?
I really appreciate going through SAC. I feel like it's very helpful reaching out to SAC executives and then having them reach out to students, just because a lot of times they have better connections with other student athletes. And so they can say, hey, this department is looking for this or this and this. And then leaving it up to the student to get back in contact with us. But I think SAC, student athlete development, are great places to start, just because I feel like for the most part, they are the ones that are connecting with student athletes so often.
One thing I would add is kind of look at what other schools in your area are doing with LGBTQ programs, and kind of adopting what they're doing and putting it into your own institution. I know that's very helpful. I've contacted with GoSpace, which has helped me come with ideas of how I should run the discussion groups, as well as what other people have been doing. And that's very helpful because I want to make this the best thing I can make it for the other athletes on campus.
I worked on diversity and inclusion through SAC #1. And then, I mean, the way I got on this webinar is because an administrator from BYU recommended it to me. So I think just texting, sending emails, and also, yeah, showing go to the meeting, send emails. I think that can be effective. Put pressure on coaches, show up at practice, do it.
Hey, Tanya, I think you may be muted.
You'd think it's my first webinar. I'm just joking. Anyway, this question is actually specific to the audience. These are members of CoSIDA and 4A, others that are definitely interested in the topic. What do you think membership organizations, including the NCAA, need to do to make an impact and move the needle towards a more welcoming, inclusive, and safe space for our LGBTQ student athletes?
They need to enforce diversity and inclusion standards, and schools that are not willing to follow them should not be able to participate in the NCAA. And that should go for anything diverse, like gender identity, sexuality, race, religion, whatever it is. It's just not okay, and they really need to take a stand for it.
I'd say continue offering trainings and webinars and putting as much accessible education out there as possible. I think Emma had hit on it earlier. Even if you just have the education out there to allow for staff administration to seek it out on their own, like at least it's there. I know everyone can't make a webinar in the middle of the day on a Tuesday, but if it's housed somewhere where they can go back and watch it, or if they can go back and read some stuff, that's something that's great. Also, I fly this thing everywhere. I fly my trans flags. Like it's when you walk into my office, that just about everyone. I can't think of anyone that's not going to be accepted unless you are just a horrible person. But I've got my trans flag. I got my rainbow flag. I've got Black Lives Matter all in my office, and that's so when students walk in, they know, okay, I can be myself in here. And yes, that's coming from a therapist's perspective, but I feel like if athletic departments did it, if at the NCAA, if I walked into the NCAA where they've got all the school plaques and everything, and I saw a rainbow flag, like I'd be trying to get a job there immediately. So I think anything that you can do to show people, it doesn't even have to be verbal all the time. Whatever you can do to just show people that you are open and accepting and supportive of them, like that is going to open you up so much more, but also give them a space. And I think that also goes back to, what are the best suggestions to see if student athletes are interested? If you have stuff like this up, you're gonna have student athletes reach out and say, hey, I saw this in your office. I really wanna create this kind of group or whatever on campus. Can you help me with that? Like you're gonna have student athletes seeking you out. So I think whatever you can do to make your environment more appealing to people, that is the best way to get student athletes on board and figure out, okay, how do we start to move the needle in the right direction?
Yeah, I think Casey said it perfectly. I just want to reiterate, education is the biggest thing for administration as well as athletes or any students. Just educating, bringing in guest speakers to keep it in conversation. The more it's talked about, the more normal it will be, and then the more people will feel accepted and have a better time throughout how many years they're in college and throughout the rest of their life.
I want to add that this is actions speak louder than words. And when I was at a Black Lives Matter parade this summer, they said, like, this isn't a moment, this is a movement. But in order for that to be the case in terms of any diversity thing, you need to show action. Do not just say it. Don't just say you're going to be an ally. Don't just say these things. Like, you really have to be ready to stand up. That's the only way that things actually become different. And student athletes have a BS meter. So if you're BSing them and you're just lip servicing inclusion, they're going to pick up on that, and that doesn't make them feel any more safe. So as a student athlete that does pick up on BS, don't even try it. But anyway, I think everyone here has good intentions, so I shouldn't go off. But I think we're all going to be okay. We're all going to be okay, I think. But yeah, actions speak louder than words.
Yeah, amen. And I'll tell you, you got to surround yourself with truth tellers. And I would put Emma Gee anywhere in that arena. She tells the truth. And I would say that for every panelist. There's so many important topics and suggestions and experiences shared. I want to echo sentiment that we're reading in the chat. I just want to thank the panelists for their vulnerability and for their authentic words, for sharing experiences that obviously have touched you deeply. It's massive. And you heard things, you heard it from both Jayden and Emma. You just hear about the weight that is lifted when you share your story and someone says, I love you, or you got a place here. That's massive. And that's going to allow people to go on to become the best that they can be. So I just want to thank everyone for joining today's information session. A big thanks to Jayden, to Emma, and Casey. You guys are gold. I learned a ton, and I'm an old bird, so I appreciate you guys sharing. I want to thank our co-hosts, CoSIDA and N4A, for producing this really important webinar series. Again, I'd encourage you to go see session 1. It was incredible. And obviously share this information with your staff, with your colleagues, share with your coaches. It's just really important that we continue to get the message out. I love what Emma says too, is like there really isn't a place for hate in the NCAA. And so we'll continue to do great work. Jayden and I work in the same conference, so I've got ideas on what we're going to do in the Atlantic 10. We'll get things moving in our conference, and we'll continue to put pressure on the NCAA. I'm just reading through my script. All the links to this will be in the CoSIDA.com website. All the on-demand options are free of charge. And thank you again for joining this incredibly important conversation today. Be well.